Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. This is Chris Snyder, Vox Mobile, and we're at the MTL online event for October 26th, 2017. We've got an exciting agenda and exciting panelists to talk about the topic of restaurant technology and mobility's impact on growth and profitability. I see we've got some folks still joining the online event here, so we'll probably wait another minute or so, and then we'll jump right into today's presentation. All right, looks like we've got a good quorum of folks that have joined, so let's go ahead and get started with today's dialogue. So let's talk about mobile thought leaders for a moment. So for maybe some of those that are first-time folks into mobile thought leaders, this is a global group. We have thousands of participants across 700-plus organizations, last count, coming from 10 different countries. This is meant to be a community. It's now been around for 4 or 5 years. We do 3 different types of events. We have live events, which are localized in different markets. That can be, I think we did one recently in Dallas, but we'll do them throughout the U.S., but also into Europe as well, and we've even done some in LATAM and South America. We have our online events, which is today's format, in which we'll take a topic. We've got some fun panelists that are joining us to debate a little bit and explore some of those, use cases and how we're all kind of commiserating a little bit, but also succeeding together. And then finally, we do, for Mobile Thought Leaders, we do research. We're actually prepping right now for the 2018 technology strategy research paper as well. So those of you participating in the community will see something from us here in the next month or so. So this is kind of our format. We've got some great sponsors. VMware is sponsoring today's session, along with Vox Mobile and Gemma as well. So we always appreciate the sponsors helping us pull these efforts together and keeping the community thriving. So today's panelists are excited. We've got Bill Lindsay, who's a restaurant technology advisor. Bill, welcome to the session today.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the invitation to participate.
And Bill, it's been fun to get to know you. I think we probably started interacting over the last 6 months, and I've really enjoyed the depth that you bring, especially when we're talking about budgets and spend and where organizations should focus.
Well, thanks very much. I like to provide some context so that people have an idea of where to focus their priorities and how much of their budget they should be dedicating to technology. So I really thank you very much.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And Stu, welcome to today's panel.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
Stu, we've got to know each other over the last few years through work with Vox and Cheesecake Factory, and your organization's always been just extremely impressive in the way in which your business runs. So really appreciate you guys showing up today and helping share some of that success with the rest of the group.
Well, thanks, and we appreciate you being such a great partner.
And Eric, welcome to today's panel.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and it's, Vox has gotten to know Brinker International and the great work you guys do with Chili's and Maggiano's, and the amount of thoughtfulness and the way in which you guys are really in pursuit of breakthrough innovation through technology has been wonderful. So excited to have you representing your organization today.
Appreciate that. Looking forward to the conversation today.
So let's start with a quote, trying to get things rolling here a little bit and get the conversation. This is a quote that Bill shared with us from Hospitality Technology magazine. But restaurants are twice as likely to struggle with ROI than mid-tier challenges. Bill, you want to share a little bit of thoughts on that, and then we'll get some of the other panelists?
Sure, yeah. I think it's very interesting that the biggest challenge that operators seem to face, at least based on survey, is trying to come up with an ROI for technology investment. Consequently, the number 2 corollary to that is a lack of sufficient IT budget. So I think that tells a very, very interesting story It's kind of self-fulfilling. But, you know, when you look through the mid-tier challenges, whether it's legacy systems or skilled IT resources or, you know, scalability, creating a culture of innovation, there's a lot of other very significant challenges. But the big focus seems to be coming up with an ROI and justifying the budgets that people need to spend in order to keep up with the ever-changing technological atmosphere that we're doing business in. You know, restaurants have become so much more dependent, I guess, rely so much on technology, not only for controls but for top-line revenue growth, that I just found this to be a fascinating place to start.
Yeah, and as we've told a lot of the different Vox customer stories, you know, when I try to explain what's happening in the market, my favorite go-tos is to talk about the restaurant industry, because it's like almost every person I meet can relate pretty quickly to the advancements of tech and how their behaviors come into the restaurants. So I think it's definitely been on the forefront of, you know, taking advantage of some of those consumer behavior patterns, especially in the areas of like loyalty.
Absolutely true. You know, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it, but loyalty seems to be the big priority for most companies, and the interesting corollary there being that budgets are shifting from back-of-the-house controls and trying to control prime costs, inventory, labor costs, and so forth. People are investing more and more into top-line revenue growth. And so loyalty is a big ticket, and there's some really interesting players out there with some innovative technologies to help restaurateurs drive that growth.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, when Brinker thinks about ROI and the challenge of, you know, getting that set appropriately, what are some of the things that you guys have been successful doing?
So in many cases, Chris, we've actually taken something to the field on a very small point of, in a proof of concept to be able to really drive ROI. I mean, a lot of it's theory until you get out there and you can see what's actually happening. But, you know, with some of our mobility that we're testing right now and doing some reads in California, that was a very small and thoughtful expansion. And then, you know, the deployment out throughout all of California, and then really now sitting and getting a read to see how everything's going.
And I've really enjoyed, you know, Eric, when I've seen kind of not just the tech part, but you guys have put together kind of programs that the tech's part of, and I think your one is like hot and fast right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We try to make sure that our tech is, not make sure, you have to guarantee that the tech is integrated with an overall larger program. You know, we can provide some tools for success, but IT is not going to be the sole driver of whether an initiative succeeds or fails.
And Stu, that seems to be a theme that goes true for Cheesecake Factory as well.
Absolutely true. We like to be a little bit cautious when we're integrating technology. We want to be certain that it's not going to get in the way of the guest experience. Mostly, I think the issue becomes, do we want technology to be a solution in search of a problem? And obviously not. So we're looking at real gaps in our space and trying to see if there is a technological solution that would help. And like Eric is saying, once we've identified something that may help, proceed very cautiously, pilot, make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row and can justify the ROI.
Yeah, and it seems so logical, and let's even go to the place of common sense, but so often we see people with tech that's in search of the problem. It's kind of the reverse, so it's probably part of the winning formula you guys got going. So, well, great. I think that's a nice setup. I always like to get the panel going here with the thoughtful quotes, so I appreciate the participation. So let's move on to the agenda a bit. I know we have an hour, but the hour always goes fast. I've done enough of these at this point, so I always try to be mindful about the pace in which we get there. But so we'll talk about building a business case for mobility, and Bill's got some great content to share, so looking forward to that especially when we talk about the innovation side of it. And then we're going to get into some time today and for both Eric and Stu to talk about some of the things they've done really well from a use case, and we'll call them spotlights. And then, assuming we've got some time still going on our side, we'll talk about some of the other use cases, spotlights that we've seen from the Vox Mobile side and some amazing things that our customers are doing. And then finally, we'll hit on the topic of improving customer experience and employee productivity. So action-packed agenda, and let's keep rolling. So we're going to move on to kind of top innovation and trends. And Bill, I think we'll kind of tee this back up into your court.
Very good. Well, just to begin, some credit to the folks at Hospitality Technology Magazine. They do an annual survey of restaurant technology. They do a nice cross-section, and they develop a lot of great content. So credit to them. I pulled the highlights as I read them from their study for some of the numbers that I'm going to be quoting here. So if you don't subscribe to Hospitality Technology, I feel like I'm obliged to give them a good plug here, especially the technology studies that they do. They're just great. So from a budgeting perspective, most restaurant companies average 2.6% of revenue on technology. It's basically 65% of restaurants are in that 1 to 3.99% range. So there's less than 17% are investing less than a point, and 18% between 4 and 6. Like I say, they're hitting for the fences on the top side. But I think it's a very comfortable range to be in the 1 to 3.99% budgetary category. The one thing that everyone agrees on is 58% expect to increase spend in 2017. So, of course, money is moving into the IT sector, which is very interesting to me, being that we've moved to software as a service, the industry's moved to cloud-based solutions, but the costs don't seem overall to be going down. People seem to be investing more and more in technology. The 12% that plan to make heavy investment upgrades tend to be the innovative companies. They tend to be looking at opportunities to drive more top-line revenue. So when you look at the distribution of the IT budget, it's interesting, again, to me that maintenance represents 58%, new systems 28%, and then R&D and innovation in the 14% category. So again, with software as a service, with as much outsourcing as going on, with the declining cost of hardware, maintenance still takes up 60% of the lion's share of the IT budget. On the software,
and Bill, do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you see that changing? I mean, with the crossover to SaaS models, will we see that in the next 2 to 5 years? That making a pretty hard shift out of maintenance?
I would have predicted that, but I'm not seeing evidence of it. The numbers really haven't shifted all that much. I think people are using software as a service as a means of spreading costs that they used to do through amortization. But what it does do is it allows people to be more nimble in terms of adopting new technologies and flexibility and trying some new things, as long as they don't enter into too long of a contract for software as a service.
I can see that.
On the software mix, I always like to look at where it is and where the projected growth lies. And this begins to tell an interesting story. Corporate enterprise, a little less than a third. Front of the house, a little less than a third. That's fairly stable year over year. But where I see the shift, the shift in the trend is back of the house is 25%. It's been a little bit higher in the past. But again, these are prime cost controls. And what's happening here is the back of the house expense is not growing at the same rate as CRM, loyalty, mobility. Even though that represents 13% of the budget, it's the area of the budget that people expect to increase spend in. So there seems to be a bit of a shift or a movement, if you will, to putting more money into CRM, loyalty, and mobility projects. I'm also seeing some questions that are popping up on the screen. Should I go ahead and answer those? One of these is, does 58% include resources? To the best of my ability to answer that question, they do. In reading the study and understanding the source of the numbers, what they're asking is the total spend that people are allocating into these areas. Now, in the past, total spend had more to do with the number of employees that you had delivering it in-house. So a lot of this is turning into software services, but it's just basically shifting those dollars to an outside provider. And on the 58% spent on maintenance, these are broad general categories in the study. So I had to read into these a little bit myself to come to the conclusions that I came to. But generally speaking, these are just broad dollars that people are allocating in their budgets to each of these categories.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, it's a great comment. So we highly encourage the audience to participate through questions, and we'll especially if they're relevant to the section we're in, we'll take them, and if not, we'll probably hold some of the questions at the end. But absolutely, when they come across and they're relevant to the content we're on, we'll try to address them. So appreciate you doing that, Bill.
Thank you. So if you want to go ahead and move us to the next slide. Basically, what we're doing now is I'm focusing on, okay, we've got our budget figured out. What are the goals and where are the strategies? And the top 4 focus areas, improved digital customer experience, engagement, loyalty, 61%. So of those that were surveyed, this is where people are most curious, most interested in making a change or becoming more and more involved in. Interestingly, it's still only 13% of the tech budget. And to me, the even more interesting fact is almost half of those surveyed believe that the other guys are doing a better job of it than they are. So to me, that shows a lack of confidence, which kind of plays into the quote that we heard earlier and that I have parroted here at the bottom of this slide. Restaurants are twice as likely to struggle with ROI than mid-tier challenges. If you go down the list here of the focus areas, these are somewhat predictable, except for the one note that I have. The customer experience appears to become more important than efficiency. To me, that's a move from scrutinizing the back of the house to more of a top-line revenue. Let's try to attract and maximize sales to the guest. And then the 2 largest challenges that are noted, the difficulty measuring the ROI for technology and the lack of budget, again, those are somewhat self-fulfilling. So my takeaway from this and the advice that I'm giving to my clients is that in order for this to work, you need a vendor that can articulate an ROI message that not only rings true to you, but arms you with the information that you need to present to your board of directors or whoever you report to. There needs to be a good collaboration between the vendors that are innovating, especially when it comes to loyalty and guest experience. There's a variety of vendors that are doing this, and in the process of doing it, they have to be able to help the operators understand how that money is going to be spent. I've looked at a lot of the companies that are out there that are doing guest experience and loyalty, and a lot of them seem to be in the same pigeonhole. It's, let's wait till the guest leaves to somehow correlate their credit card information to an account on file, collect information, offer them a reason to return to the restaurant, and so on. A lot of times this means that customers are expected to load a variety of apps on their phone, and I think in some cases people are a little weary of all the apps that have to be loaded. So I did find one company that I'll give a plug to. I don't have any involvement with this company other than I'm very, very curious about their technology, and I've been speaking to them a lot. A company called Thanks. It's THANX. They took a bit of a different approach, so I thought I would throw that one out here for the sake of interest. That with the Thanks app, you get the Thanks app if there's a restaurant that is participating with Thanks, that in other words is using their loyalty program, you can link to them. So you have a credit card in your Thanks app, you link to a restaurant, and anytime you use your credit card in that restaurant, you get credit for the visit. So what it's doing basically is running on the credit card network instead of on the POS or on the processor level. And you can have multiple credit cards linked to a single account so that basically the restaurateur is getting more of a passive loyalty program, very little friction in terms of what it takes for guests to participate. And they're getting a wealth of information, not the least of which is the ability to build an ROI. If there's a guest and I have a profile and I know the frequency of their visit, I know how recently they visited, I know what their average check runs, I can now measure whether they're coming in more frequently, whether they visited most recently, and whether their average check is increasing. So being able to work with a vendor, and Thanks I think is one of the ones that seem to be doing the best job of helping people understand the ROI. I think that will help people to better qualify their programs and put them in a context that helps people understand why revenue is increasing. I'll give you one other comparison. In Q1, Shake Shack saw a real decline in revenue. I think it was about $500,000, and I'm fairly confident of that number. They put an app out that allowed people to download the app and receive a free burger. And a lot of people took them up on that. And so what ended up happening is they implemented a loyalty program that actually depressed revenues in Q1. So free isn't the way to go. It's really more about surprise and delight and finding ways to deliver value to guests to cause them to be interested in visiting more frequently and hopefully spending more while they're there.
Yeah, I think, Bill, that you think about customer experience, and we're already challenged with this ROI measurement, right? And then you say that customer experience is one of the drivers here. It's just so difficult to measure, right? I mean, I know there's lots of different ways in which you see people attempting to do it, but any insights on how that's going to start to come into the equation? I mean,
well, I think that the best thing that I've read is really focusing on, and I don't even know if this is a real word, but I'm reading it enough that I believe it is, recency, frequency, average check, and overall spend. As long as you can collect that amount of information on guests in your loyalty program, then you've got all the metrics that you need in order to determine whether you're getting enough visits, whether the visits are increasing in terms of spend, and also certainly some data that you can mine that puts into context the type of offers that you send to a guest. So, if somebody is a particular fan of a particular item, it's a lot easier to use that as leverage to help encourage them to return to the restaurant and maybe add something to it. So I think the metrics right now seem to be recency, frequency, average check, and overall spend. That's the best that I've been able to uncover.
Okay, that's good to know.
Which kind of takes us into our next slide. It's always been location, 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 but in today's world, we'll put location in a different context. I saw a presentation from this gentleman, and I heard this quote, and I still love it, from Mr. Asif Khan, the founder and president of the Location-Based Marketing Association. Location is the new cookie. Being able to determine, primarily through the use of phones and mobile devices, where people are gives us some advantage in terms of how we can market to them. And there's a number of ways that these technologies work. Most of the people on this call are probably familiar with them. Manual prompted location, where you shoot a QR or quick response code. Near field communication, or NFC, that requires you to be very, very close to a device, to a tap and pay or Apple or Samsung Pay. More of the automatic geofencing technologies, which then come into how closely you can define someone's location. Wi-Fi is probably the most frequently used. Free Wi-Fi has reasons behind it and strategies, but certainly GPS. I've seen some interesting things done with beacons, the Bluetooth Smart or Bluetooth Low Energy devices, and also visual light communication. VLC I'll talk briefly about. In my presentations, people seem to be least familiar with this one. VLC is actually a chip that's embedded in LED lighting. There's a company out of Boston called Byte Light that developed the technology and was acquired, I think, last year. It basically broadcasts through flashing lights that are moving more quickly than the human eye can detect a MAC address, and it will signal that code to a light sensor, which is on both sides of almost every mobile phone or smartphone that's out there today. So if you're within light distance of 3 LED lights and can pick up 3 separate signals, they can triangulate you within a very, very small radius. So it's come down to the point now where lighting is starting to come into play. But I think that the real issue on the geofencing, there are companies out there that are doing a great job of using this, especially in pizza delivery. I read a study of Domino's in Europe where the bus systems tend to run on time, where they began doing marketing through the bus stops in order to know exactly where someone was when they ordered the pizza, if they're going to pick it up, how long before they'll be there, and if they're on their way home, what time to have the pizza meet them at the door. So there's a lot of these types of technologies that are coming into play to help speed service, but also improve quality. And I'm sure everybody that's in the restaurant business on this call is concerned about food quality and delivery. It's a real issue in the industry today. The other location technologies usually come in with a reservation or getting on a wait list. So companies like OpenTable, No Wait is part of Yelp now, Dine Time, there are certainly others that will allow the restaurant to know that you're coming. You know, one of the issues with loyalty is it's less effective to wait for the guest to leave to find out that they're in your VIP club. It'd be nice to know as they approach the front door. So I think that's one of the big challenges that everybody is wrestling with, is how to recognize the guests sooner rather than later.
You know, Bill, we've got one of our customers. It's an airline, and they're getting to the point on their frequent flyers that they're trying to prompt the flight attendants with a picture of the passenger, such that they can greet them by name and even know what they like to consume. I thought it's an interesting project. It's not in production yet, but they're working on it right now.
Very nice.
I think you can start to see some of that kind of Cheers effect where everybody knows your name, and you know you kind of feel it special in that way.
Yeah, especially, you know, for ordering apps, you know, and in fact, I'll skip to the end over here on the bottom right under Starbucks. It kind of transitions to an interesting situation. They moved to the new app last year, which allow people to have their favorites and just simply order their beverage and pay for it with the app, so you don't have to wait through the line and scan your code. And it just means that you show up and pick up your drink. Well, 27% of all transactions at Starbucks are somewhere north of 6 million orders a month. They're coming through this app. And what went wrong was that the physical layout of the Starbucks was not designed for this many people showing up to claim a drink. There was more real estate that was allocated for people queuing in order to place an order and stand in front of that display case with those infernal good-looking desserts that are staring at you the whole time. So what ended up happening, if you didn't follow this story, is there was a bit of a shakeup because people were showing up in droves to pick up coffees and actually waiting longer. So, you know, you've got to make sure that your business plan and your physical plant is aligned with the technologies and the impacts that they'll bring to the organization. But just to kind of fill out this slide in the time I have left, mobile payment is a big issue right now. Pay at the table is on everybody's mind, not to mention EMV compliance and chargebacks. So, you know, mobile wallet and pay at the table, these are Gartner numbers. They say 22% of restaurants expected to be half in 2 years. I think that's probably a fairly safe bet. The revenues at $721 billion in 2017 through mobile payment, and 35% of all restaurant apps include the ability to place an order. And by placing the order, that also implies paying for the order. So all of this technology is moving into the bring your own device world, and the restaurants have to be set up in such a way where they can handle it. You know, PayPal's the king of technology on this. They had a little over $102 billion last year, up 55%. Paydiant is the QR code system that Subway does so well. And then I mentioned Venmo for person-to-person. They're not really a direct payment app, but they allow people to split checks and share costs and basically transfer money between friends very seamlessly. One company I've seen do a great job on the pay at the table is MyCheck. They come out of Tel Aviv. They've been very active here in the U.S. in the last number of years. They have a system development kit that will either integrate with your website. They can also help build in loyalty and other ancillary apps that you need to kind of flesh out your IT vision and include the pay at the table option. And the CRM and so forth are all part of it. In fact, I'm fairly certain their technology is behind Cake Pay at Cheesecake Stew. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
How's that working for you guys? Are you getting good traction with Cake Pay?
Yeah, slowly but surely we're building up the number of folks who are using it. It's a nice thing from what you were talking about earlier, because generally when folks come into the restaurant, we want them to open up Cake Pay and let their server know that they're going to be using it. So we kind of have an idea that they're enthusiastic customers from the get-go.
You know, Stu, as one of your enthusiastic customers, I know when I bring my family in there, you know, it's got many nice features of Cake Pay, including the menu. But what's great about it is when we're done, we're done. You know, it's that however many minutes it feels like an attorney when you've got young kids that you're settling up with.
I hear that. Yeah, I have a 19-year-old, and I can't keep her contained.
Well, why don't we go ahead and click on over to the next slide, and I'll kind of finish up on this section. Prime costs are the back-of-the-house controls that so many systems are available out there today to help people do a better job of controlling their prime costs. So I'll move somewhat quickly through these, but point out the parts that are really being driven through innovation. On the inventory side, mobile counts. I work as a strategic advisor for Compete Restaurant Management Systems as well as See To It. There's a lot of development going into making it easier for people to count on the go with mobile phones and tablets. One of the things that I always try to encourage my clients to do is take frequent counts, but make it as easy and seamless and accurate as possible. Count what you need, not what you have, and the reason is the supplier websites. People tend to go through and do an inventory count, calculate how much they need, and then sit down and manually enter that stuff into a vendor website, which is basically just shifting the manpower from the vendor to the restaurant. Usually these managers have other things to do, so if you don't have EDI or simple vendor interfaces where you can push files back and forth with your vendors, most software out there today offers these types of interfaces. I think that they're very big over at Brinker. Is that true, Eric?
Very true. We actually implemented an EDI solution for ordering, it's been a couple of years now, and we've seen some very genuine labor savings, soft savings, but allowing our restaurant managers to go out and really run their restaurants and spend less time keying their orders in. It's been meaningful and did help move the needle in terms of saving them time.
Yeah, I think the other point to make too is if you're using EDI, it's much easier for your inventory software to compare the invoice cost to the order guide or the price that was quoted from the vendor. There are often many, many dollars left on the table when people aren't doing that. And if you're trying to audit manually without the use of technology, it's just overwhelming. But most inventory systems will do a fast compare that the vendor quoted one price, delivered another, and unless there was a mistake along the way, there's probably a credit due. That kind of takes us into the accounts payable automation. I also work as an advisor to a company called PlateIQ. If you're not familiar with PlateIQ, it's an accounts payable automation service that interfaces with all the major accounting and inventory software that's out there in the market today. And instead of having to key the information in, there are a lot of vendors, liquor, beer, wine, produce, especially if you're farm to table and other local suppliers, that don't participate in EDI or don't have that kind of sophistication. So with PlateIQ, you can take a stack of invoices in the restaurant, put them on a sheet feeder, just scan them into a document that you can either forward an email, drop into a browser app, or there's actually a mobile iOS app where you can take a picture of an invoice. However you acquire that image, PlateIQ will digitize that, convert that into accounting data for accounts payable purposes, push it to your accounting system, or if you're doing line item inventory, they can also push that same line item inventory information. It saves time, it's much more accurate, and you get a great dashboard that helps monitor changes in volatile item costing, whether it's up in red or down in green. It'll immediately let you know what's going on with your plate cost and what's going to be showing up on your plate cost in the coming days. That gets you down into the opportunity to look for credits. As long as you're getting accurate receiving information, you may have credits coming if your vendor made an error and actually charged you more than they should. On the labor and scheduling side, make sure that your software has the ability to track jurisdictional rules. I think the big leader out there is Hot Schedules. That's what you guys are using over at Cheesecake, huh, Stu?
It is. We've been using it for quite some time.
And you've had good success with the folks at Hot Schedules?
Very good success, yeah. It's really popular among our staff members as well.
I think that's the interesting paradigm that Hot Schedules created, where the staff members like it so much that they talk management into to getting into it. There's certainly other companies out there. I mentioned Compete and See To It that have similar features, but you really should have a labor management product that allows your staff to pick up their schedule online, put in requests for time off, shift swaps, all those sorts of things. You need a wage calculation. I'm sure Stu will tell you in California, if you don't have a computer, you don't stand much chance for calculating your wages before payday. There's just so many rules in many different states that you need your software to help you figure that stuff out. And then basically your forecasting methodology, whether it's guest count or whether it's revenues, and then your staffing levels and how you calculate an ideal schedule. Normally you want a schedule plan. You want the actual time in, time out, but you also want to compare that to what an ideal schedule would have been so that you can look for opportunities to either trim staff where you don't need it or add staff where you might be able to increase revenue.
Well, Bill, it really seems like these are the core elements, right? If you're going to put that ROI together and you're going to go have a financial conversation with your CFO or somebody like that of further investment, you said these are the prime costs, these areas we got to get our arms around and minds around to show impact. Is that fair?
It's very fair, and I think that really it speaks very well to how technology in the restaurant. I always say the controls are in the store. The strategies happen above store, and the goals are set above store, but it really gets down to whether they can execute in the store. And what you don't want to do is put a process in place that distracts your team from serving the guest and the best quality product that you can serve. On the other hand, if you can use technology to make it easier to do your inventory, spend less time keying and receiving, schedule more quickly and communicate with your staff, that creates the time that you need to do the job that needs to be done in the restaurant, whether it's front of the house or back of the house.
Let's really appreciate the overview, Bill, and I know we're getting ready to move into hearing from Stu and Eric, but we haven't talked about kind of some of the futures, and before we kind of move to some of the spotlight pieces, any thoughts on what the age demographic? Everyone loves to talk about the millennials and behavior patterns. And any comments that you think that some of these trends are going to get affected by in the near future?
A couple of little things. I think that there's a couple of interesting demographic factors. For example, surveys. I'm in an age demographic where if you send me a survey, I'm going to delete it. If I have something that I think you need to know, I'll tell you. Otherwise, I just don't want to spend my time taking surveys. On the other hand, for younger folks, not receiving a survey is considered a negative. And if people are not interested in their opinions, they don't view that in the same manner that I do. So you have to stop and try not to think of your guest as yourself. You have to stop and try to define who your guest is, at least who you want your guest to be, and then market to the things that are important to them. So whether it's, BYOD technology where they want to be able to pay at the table or at least be able to walk out of the restaurant and know that the check was paid and that the typical tip was left, those types of technologies I think are convenient, useful. I certainly enjoy them, but I think for the younger market, they're a requirement. And it used to be that we needed technology to do the best job we could in our restaurants. Now it's somewhat the other way around, where the technology seems to come first, and then the restaurants seem to follow behind that with what they deliver. And I think delivery is on everybody's mind. It's difficult to produce your best quality product and then hand it to a complete stranger that's going to transport it to the customer, and the customer opens the product up expecting the same quality of meal that they receive in the restaurant. And without having the ability to control the delivery aspect, it's a little bit unnerving for many restaurant operators. So I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of how delivery is going to play into the market, but I'm sure that both Stu and Eric can tell you that delivery is becoming more and more a critical issue for restaurant operators, especially brands that are so well known as Brinker, Chili's, and so forth, as well as Cheesecake Factory.
It's funny about that. Actually, got an update from the Cheesecake Factory in email today that said, don't forget to get the Cheesecake Factory delivered with DoorDash, reduced rates through 10/29.
Yeah,
it's your point. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
It's a really good deal. Everyone should take advantage of it.
Well, it's one of those things that's now, I would have never go back 6 months ago, and I wouldn't have thought about delivery and cheesecake in that way. But I think it's done right. It can actually change some of the behaviors.
Well, definitely, and we're seeing, I think, among the younger demographic, as Bill mentioned, that people are really looking for that type of thing. I mean, I was shocked to see McDonald's partnership with Uber Eats, I guess for people who going through the drive-thru is too much trouble for, but it definitely seems to be on the upswing.
Yep. Well, Bill, thank you very much for this. And Stu, since we've got you kind of on the mic, why don't we go ahead and move on to the spotlight for Cheesecake Factory. And why don't you tell us a little about what's been going on at the Cheesecake Factory?
Well, sure. I think a large focus for us now is on learning and mobile learning via mobile devices. We had a situation for a long time where a tremendous amount of our training was done side by side and on paper. And that was seen as the best way to get things done, mainly because you've got an expert standing next to you who can answer your questions. So when the idea came up that there might be some things that we could impact with mobile technology, the challenge went out to say, well, you really need to prove that this is going to be better than a person standing next to you. And in a lot of instances, obviously the person standing next to you is always going to be the better source to give you information that you need in the moment, just in time, just for me. But there are some specific instances in which mobile training is a better solution, and we found that out through extensive piloting. So for example, one of our training courses has to do with garnishing the items that are brought out to the guest, and the server needs to do this. In our former training, we'd actually cook the items, get all the garnishes out, and have them stand there and garnish them. So maybe one person could garnish one item, another person in the training could garnish another item, but everybody wasn't garnishing everything. But through mobility, we were able to create a course where you can virtually garnish all of the items. The training takes 20 minutes as opposed to an hour and a half. You get to do every one of them. We don't have to cook the food. And we find that the servers retain this a lot longer. So it ends in fewer comps, mainly because the guests are getting the right thing delivered to them every time.
Well, that's pretty, I think it's pretty exciting when you start to think about kind of the ability to have a content delivery, right, that people are going to be more familiar with, especially probably the age demographic that are your servers inside your restaurant.
Absolutely. They're definitely expecting to be trained in a modern way. It's not like they're complete Luddites and they're frightened of paper or anything, but they're used to doing their learning in their college courses. They're using Moodle and Blackboard and other LMSs to get their training every day. So why wouldn't we try and do that in the restaurant space, especially if it's saving us time and money?
Yeah, no, Stu, I got two girls. I'm a little bit behind you, so they're 10 and 13, but they wouldn't know what to do in education without their Chromebooks. They've had them since like second grade.
Yeah, exactly. And in a space where, somebody can, if they don't know something, they can whip out their phone and find the answer very quickly without having to talk to another person. Why would they seek out another person when they've got instant information available to them? Yep.
Well, we always like to talk about kind of our successes. It was interesting. We had a viewpoint of you guys did a lot of work and research on trying to take the training concept to a BYOD place with your servers. Can you share a little bit on that initiative and why it didn't see production?
Absolutely. So, and Bill alluded to it a little bit earlier, but mainly the issue was, well, let me take a step back and tell you what we attempted to do. We wanted to give our staff members an opportunity to take their orientation training before they had their first shift. So they'd do all their paperwork in the restaurant. We'd give them instructions for logging in on their own devices to our LMS to take their orientation training, at least portions of it that made sense to do without an instructor. And it worked really well. We were able to allow them to get that basic introduction to the restaurant before they learn the specifics of their work group. Then we had some challenges with labor in mainly New York and California, where there's a minimum 2-hour pay period in some instances. In others, let's say they work part of the day and they want to do training at home. There's a you have to pay for the time that they spent traveling, and actually San Juan, Puerto Rico has some of the same issues with training as well. So in the end, because a huge plurality of our stores are in New York and California, and we saw the environment getting more restrictive, we backed off from that a bit. So now we're doing our orientation training in the restaurant, but we're adapting the training that we used for BYOD, and that is still saving our operators some time.
Well, it's definitely one of those cases where you figured out how to make the technology work and had great line of sight to the behavioral patterns, but sometimes those governance and and rules by state get in the way.
Absolutely. And no comment on the validity of the rules or anything like that. We just have to react to the environment that we're in.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it wouldn't do us much good right now to debate validity. But well, that's wonderful. I appreciate you sharing that. And just sake of time, Stu, we're going to probably keep moving here a little bit. And so, Eric, let's talk a little bit about payment solutions. I think you guys have been doing some really innovative things there at Brinker.
Yeah, so we've worked with one of our vendor partners in Ziosk over the last couple of years to address both EMV and then also near-field communication. And we're in 2 restaurants right now, and looking to go from there. But we're going to be able to start accepting dip payments and near-field, as quickly as we can roll out. But doing that now in those 2 restaurants, and obviously everybody is well aware of what's going on with chargebacks and what that can potentially do to impact on any brand. And this helped us get on early and start addressing that in the casual dining segment. And then near field, we really looked at that as something that can help maintain relevancy. There's plenty of places you can go and pay with your phone, and we feel like that's something that's of value for Chili's.
Well, that's great, and I think we've been talking about trying to be ahead of some of those customer expectations. And I know I was in Asia a few weeks back, and it's different. They'd never let somebody walk away with their credit card, right? And the amount of payment on phones it was surprising because we don't see it as much here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean we've had the ability for our guests to pay at the table, and this has just really given them more options and more secure methods for doing it. But in terms of I believe Stu had spoken earlier about Cake Pay and being able to kind of drive, the guests can drive their own timing on when they would depart, and that's definitely something that we see a benefit with the kiosks. And now we're giving them more options, and then also helping secure Brinker in terms of being able to accept those dipped and tapped transactions.
Mm-hmm. And how much of a difference do you see between Maggiano's and Chili's? Are those strategies very different in how you're leveraging technology?
So, Chili's versus Maggiano's. Maggiano's has it's a more refined experience, and so a tabletop device with a screen on there is probably not the right solution. Maybe the right thing can come along that we can find that, but there are 2 similar strategies and an acknowledgement that payments is moving forward and it's going to move forward quickly, but it's not. They are treated differently for us. Yeah,
no, I think that's what we see too, and it's the reason I brought it up is that it's not a one size fits all. I think it has a lot to do with the type of experience and brand that you guys have created and how those clients kind of expect their experience to go.
Absolutely.
Well, great. Well, Eric, is there anything else you'd like to share before we continue on?
Well, in terms of mobility and building a business case, the work that we've done in California and somewhat here in Texas has been, very successful. We feel like we've put a good solution out there that now we can get a good solid read, but it really was a matter of putting the technology in the field and having a belief around what things were going to have, where we were going to see positives and upticks, but really needing that data before we can give you, before we can really see what our ROI is going to look like. So that's, it is a challenge, but it's something with great partnership with our ops teams we've been able to do.
Yeah, and it's not always a given. Some of our vantage point, seeing the IT organizations and the ops teams come together at some point, it's you'd think it happens more often, but that partnership doesn't seem to be always natural.
Agreed.
And I think that, someone mentioned this, I forget whom, on our conversation earlier about, I think there's still some hesitancy about getting technology between the management and the customers, right? And so sometimes I think that might be in that kind of conflict between IT and operations.
Yeah, and we really want to try and make sure that we can engage, that the technology that comes in allows our managers to do what we really need them to do there, and that's, be leaders in the restaurant and not take them away from engaging with our team members and engaging with our guests. And, how does that enable them to be able to run their restaurants better than they, even better? And so, that's another thing with the mobility and the tablets with the mobile point of sale. It gives us the opportunity for our team members to even spend more time with our guests. Obviously, you want to build a rapport and, hopefully do some upsell there, but, it also lets them be able to spend some time and tell a little bit of a story about Chili's and, get to know our guests and really build that rapport that makes them want to feel special.
Yep. Well, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing, Eric. I think we're going to keep moving on here a little bit because we're, like I said earlier, this hour goes very quickly. It always does, but really good experiences. So thank you, Stu and Eric, for those shares. And we've got a couple others wanted to click through that we've been fortunate enough to be part of here at Vox Mobile. One in the retail, so not specifically the restaurant side of this, has been an initiative called Save the Sale. And the opportunity here, which I think some of us have experienced as consumers, is really when you're in that moment and you're making buying decisions and you're trying to decide, like, what am I paying the right price at the right place, and how do I think about this? And so we've most likely all done it, and we grab our phones and we search and we try to find something. And you've seen signs inside some of these retailers that, hey, bring us your ad, bring us your phone, and we'll match it or do something else. But this retailer basically got a bit more aggressive and thought about, how do we get our associates to look for those moments in time, and how do we get competitive in the equation and not have people go out? And I really, bring this one up because retail in general and kind of its consumer behaviors and how mobile impacts it is at a high point, right? We all know retail's been under many, many different cycles of pressure, but I think it's probably never been greater, and we've all seen the details around it. So we like these kind of initiatives. We see organizations continue to think about, and obviously, as Bill took us through earlier, the different cost components for restaurants, you'll see a lot of the same ones hitting other organizations inside the retail space. Another one I'd like to share is a bit more in the field of clienteling. So it's one of the largest, especially retail jewelers, and they've done an amazing job of bringing mobile technology into their stores. And some of the most basics when they started with kind of not mobile point of sale, but starting with the configuration. And if you think about your kind of retail jewelry experiences, it could be you're looking for a specific item, but it's not the polish you want, the color you want, and so they built configurators to kind of emulate that. And then they started to say, oh gosh, if we have these tablets in here, we should start bringing in customer data to it. We should actually start to further differentiate mobile point of sale. And they've even gone to the place of starting to think about the life cycle of the jewelry. And think about this type of, we're wanting to feel special, VIP. A lot of the jewelry that we buy is not through chains, because you want your person to know you and kind of know the family history, and how does that ever get done at a large retailer. So clienteling coming into play to make sure that you've got kind of not the life cycle, the life history of the purchases and what that means, all the way to the value of those items, and making sure you can guarantee that the item that you have is what you originally purchased, especially when you've got cleaning cycles and things that go on in this industry. So really good information that we've in progress we've seen in this client as well. So I guess we'll kind of leave on the client spotlights to thank all those that participated and continue to share inside of Mobile Thought Leaders. A lot of the great innovation we've seen is not always from your exact peer or competitor in your space, but taking some of those items that somebody else has applied and maybe shifting and adjusting it a bit and bringing that type of purpose back into your business as well. So what's going to happen next? We've got some other items that are out there for you guys from a collateral perspective to leverage. As we mentioned earlier, there's always the white papers that are getting produced. It's these digital assets on the online events, and continue to look forward to some other of the local events that we've got going on inside Mobile Thought Leaders as well. So keep in mind that it's what makes this community strong is everyone that participates, and we're grateful and thankful for those that do. Also, like to give a special thanks to our sponsors, VMware. I know that Stu and Eric, both their organizations, use the AirWatch platform for helping manage their mobility needs. So we appreciate sponsors VMware and Vox Mobile and Gemma. And also, I'd like to give a very special thank you to Bill. Bill, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
And Stu, thank you for taking the time. I know they've got you pretty busy at the Cheesecake Factory.
They do. Pretty busy feeding me. But it was a great opportunity, and I really appreciate participating.
And Eric, as always, thank you for sharing all the great advances you guys are making at Brinker International.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the opportunity today. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we'll talk again soon. And for everyone in Mobile Thought Leaders, thank you for the participation in the community, and we will talk. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.